Well, good afternoon, everyone. Mark Hazlitt, Executive Director of CCAE here, and I hope wherever you are, you're enjoying this quick heat wave hitting across the country, typically kind of July, maybe August weather that we're having here in the last week of May. No complaints from me. I love it. I think it's great. This is our last COVID-19 webinar series presentation today and panel gathering. We've done 11 of these over the last 9 weeks. We've reached a little over 1,300 participants, and we've had 50 panel members join us in a number of different areas. They've all been very insightful. They've all brought a little bit of new information to the table, and what we thought we'd do for our last one is bring back the same 8 panel members that joined us the first time, which was on March 25th, and just sort of touch base back with them on a number of different areas, have some conversation around life during and maybe a little bit beyond, looking into crystal balls a little bit about after the or ongoing through the rest of the pandemic time. We've a large number of questions submitted once again, thanks to everyone. And so we've split this group of 8 into 2 smaller groups. We're going to spend about the next half an hour talking on some specific areas, and then we're going to sort of everybody's going to get a chance to chime in on life during and going forward beyond the pandemic. I certainly want to thank all 8 panel members for making their time today once again and joining us to share. So we're going to jump right in. The first area relates to communications. We're going to throw these questions out to Derek Cassoff from McGill and Aaron Sargent Greenwood from St. Mary's University. What is your biggest surprise from a communications point of view in managing this crisis so far? And Derek, why don't you go first?
Sure, happy to, and thank you so much, Mark, and the team at CCAE for organizing these webinars. These last, you said 8 weeks. It feels like 8 years in some ways that we've been in this situation. So I'll answer that question. I'll sort of maybe mention 2 things. One, very briefly, in terms of sort of the transition, in terms of the surprise. I would say how seamless the transition to remote work has been for my team in particular. Maybe perhaps it's different in different professions, but certainly in communications, we've really been able to remain connected as a team. We've been able to remain very productive. So watch out, Prix d'Excellence 2021, we're coming for you. But I think that, the level of production, the quality of the work, the connectedness amongst the team members, now using essentially video chat like Zoom and Microsoft Teams has kept the team, I think, much closer than I would have imagined had you put this question to me, 8 or 10 weeks ago about what the situation would look like in the office. The second thing I would say, maybe more specific to the communications portfolio, is I've actually been amazed at how much of an appetite there has been from our alumni and donors to hear from their alma mater, from McGill in our case. I remember, I may have mentioned this on the first panel all those weeks ago, when we had our first senior management meeting. Our VP, Mark Weinstein, sort of gathered everyone together, and he said, the 3 things that are most important as we move forward now are communications, and communications. So we sort of had our marching orders early on, and I think we made a very successful pivot to, informing our community about the subject that mattered most to people, which was the COVID-19 pandemic and the university's response to it. And I just pulled some numbers just to sort of show the appetite that we've seen. So just looking back, our open rates on our emails are up about 7% in the last 8 weeks. Our click-throughs to content on our website, where we host all of this sort of COVID response content, is up 50%. Our engagement on social media is up 30%. This is compared to up to the middle of March. And even our unsubscribe rates on our emails have essentially been cut in half. So people just seem really excited to want to engage with us, whether it's through webcasts and webinars, or through emails or social media posts that we put out. And that's surprised me, that the numbers have been so high, and that we managed to really keep them steady throughout. That, even as we go in from week to week to week, we haven't really seen any drop off in our alumni and donors audience attention. So that's been very encouraging and validating to see.
Thanks, Derek. I think everybody will be interested. Perhaps we can follow up and do some kind of gathering of that data from
Mm.
across the country just to see how other schools have done. Erin, your thoughts in terms of the biggest surprise?
Yeah, echoing a lot of what Derek said, certainly one of the comments that I'd noted for myself is I feel that this, communications professionals are built for pace, many of them, and kind of their ability to work in a virtual environment, their comfort with new tools, adopting new messages, building them in, was really critical to the success. And at St. Mary's, the university communications function as a whole lives in advancement. So speaking from that perspective, I was really surprised then, and I am still in reflecting on it, how quickly we had to transition through an emergency communications into a new reality of communicating for a virtual university with a much broader mandate for the communications professionals. So, we had really kind of parsed out some stakeholders, new students and current students, not really our business. And all of a sudden, faculty and staff, just in one particular channel, but not everything. But when you move into emergency communications and you take on the responsibility of eyes on everything, and then you take on the responsibility with an advancement of driving revenue, students, current students and prospective students comes into the house little more completely. They weren't not thought of, but this new reality of communicating, a team responsible for communicating for the university in all ways, was a massive shift. And the team is doing a terrific job, as is everybody around the country. But the success of it really depended on looking for the points of integration and leverage. And we're just constantly layering on a new plan, a new channel in the framework, a new set of communications messages. And every time we think we have it all laid out, there's another layer. And shifting back and forth from communicating the tremendous impact of the institution and the importance of our donors and volunteers back into the financial realities that the university might be facing, and trying to straddle that back and forth, not being too rosy in some ways. It's been an interesting experience, and that's really been the surprise for me, is just how many layers keep getting added, but that with if you try and keep it all in one place, it's a bit easier than when you were pushing some pieces away.
Thanks, Erin. We're going to go next to Mike Haan from Simon Fraser University and Gillian Morrison from the University of Toronto. Talk a little bit about major gifts and some fundraising. We've had, for sure, at least 2 of these webinars focused in that area, but I think every other one probably had a few droplets involved. We've heard that most schools have moved quickly into stewardship calls, check-in calls to donors and prospects, but now solicitations are starting again. And so, Mike, to you, how have fundraising activities changed? And we were specifically asked about corporations and foundations and their receptiveness to any communications.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to the CCAE leadership group for organizing this. What a terrific venue. That's a big question. We've seen a decline, I think, until recently on corporate solicitations, and not that corporations have been adverse from being contacted, but depending on which industry they're in, they're either swamped or they're managing. And those that are managing are more interested in themes related to COVID-19 or pandemic management than new gifts. Foundations, same thing is what we've seen here so far. The foundations that have been most active are those who are actively involved in COVID relief or some form of pandemic help. I'm seeing, and I think we are all seeing here at SFU, a little bit of shifting from foundations, looking a little bit more into the future right now, but it still feels really early at this moment in time. On the major gift side, like everyone, everything's moved to remote communications. And I'm not seeing consistent technology with our major gift community. Some only want phone calls. They don't like video conferencing. Others only want Zoom, and others only want Google Play or Google, the Google version of Zoom. Sorry, I'm so zoomed out these days. And I'm finding we really have to accommodate what our donors want. And then there's older and younger. There are some donors who are very tech savvy and others who aren't. Some donors who have really good Wi-Fi bandwidth. And there's all these little things now in the moment during a meeting that we're having to adjust to. And if we've got a president, in our case, both a president and an incoming president on a call with a donor. In fact, last week we were on a call with an older donor who had very, very poor bandwidth. It makes for a very challenging conversation. It's hard to be seamless, hard to be in the moment, hard to adjust quickly in the conversation itself, and really figure out the nuance, which means that those conversations are shorter. They're not an hour like they used to be. They tend to be 20 minutes to half an hour. Versus conversations with our gift and estate planning donors, which are a little more intimate. They're usually one-on-ones. They're not groups of people. And what we're hearing from our gift and estate planning team is that those conversations are becoming much longer, up to 2 hours at a time, and on average, an hour at a time. And they're covering much more meaningful ground, and the conversations tend to be much more intimate as well, which is quite fruitful from a long-term perspective. And they're making headway with their discussions on that side of things as well. So that's an interesting thing to see, our major gifts and our gift and estate planning conversations being quite different. The other recent change, today I had the first request for a face-to-face meeting. So that's a bit extraordinary. One of our major donors doesn't want to do a Zoom call, doesn't want to do a video call, wants to meet face-to-face with safe social distancing protocol. So that's the first time that I've had that. I wonder if this marks a shift, maybe not, but it's actually good to start thinking about when we will start doing face-to-face calls and how we will do those face-to-face calls. They cannot be done in an office anymore. They have to be done in a boardroom where we can kind of sit apart appropriately and yet foster some form of connection at the same time.
Thanks, Mike. That's an interesting development. Certainly we didn't hear that a couple of weeks ago when we talked about nuances of major gifts and some campaign-related conversations. Gillian, from your perspective, change in fundraising activities over the last 2 months?
Yeah, so thanks, Mark and team, for this occasion today and all of the work that you've been doing during this time period. Some of you would have probably joined us for the Prix d'Excellence Awards last week, which were really well done and allowed the community still to celebrate. And we've celebrated our other award winners throughout the last couple of weeks. So thanks to you and the team for making sure that all of that has continued on, because I think that those moments of celebration are never more important than at times when we can't be together. So in terms of how fundraising activities have changed, I think Mike has captured a lot of the themes. What I thought I would share is that, we continued to close gifts, throughout March and April, where we had conversations ongoing. We continued to open conversations. What I'm seeing now is a shift where I think the conversations we were opening in March and April tended to be related to COVID, right? So we were doing, as all of us, we were doing intensive outreach to our donors, and sometimes those outreach calls, stewardship calls, would result in someone saying, what can I do now to help? And so there were gifts that we closed that arose out of those conversations, and were more specific to the response to the crisis. And now, though, I'm seeing more conversations that are about the mission that donor is interested in, the aspect of the U of T's mission that donor is passionate about and would like to see continuance of. So that, I think, is an important shift that we're seeing, and I think we'll continue to see that grow as people move into, more and more into that recovery mode. And, I think Mike's this outreach that Mike's had from a donor asking for a face-to-face meeting, shows that people are moving towards recovery. And I would say that's even happening with corporations and foundations where I agree with what Mike has said about their preoccupation with the response. But we are having a meeting next week with a corporation where they want to pick up again a conversation that we were having with them prior to the crisis about their next gift with us. And that will not be COVID related. It'll be related to the things that have been important and motivating to them. So I think those are important shifts that we're seeing. I actually checked in with our prospect management team to just get a sense of, what's our activity looking like across the university. And in terms of the number of gifts and the number of meetings that we were having in March and April, it definitely did dip from, if you look at year over year and past years, but it held up better than I would have expected it to. So that means that our people were really effective at continuing to stay connected with our donors. And I think that's why we're continuing to see, gifts close and so on. The other thing that I was interested to see in the data that the team shared with me is the number of discovery visits that are happening at the university. And actually, I think if I'm recalling correctly, we've done more discovery visits at this point in the fiscal year than we had at this point in last fiscal year. So that was encouraging to me because this has been something I've been worried about is how do we initiate new conversations on these sorts of platforms where it's just that much more difficult to get to know someone in this kind of format than it is to continue a relationship. So encouraged to see the discovery happening. Kudos to the team members that are making that happen, and look forward to seeing how we support the team to continue that work and learn from what people are learning from around that part of the solicitation cycle.
Thanks, Gillian. That's another potential survey for CCAE to check in with all the schools around the number of contacts and discovery calls and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. I think that'd be
being done across the country. We're going to shift now to alumni relations, and Nuvyn Peters from the University of Calgary and Brent Johnston from the Country Day School. Finding ways to reach out to alumni may be, it's happening. It may not be easy, but I think it's certainly taking place. But one of the questions we were asked was about actually connecting alumni to alumni and whether or not that's something that's happening. And then we're all interested, I think a lot of folks are interested in shifting of programming to virtual, and any comments you might have on that. We'll start with you, Nuvyn.
Thanks so much, Mark, and it's great to see everybody virtually today. I think that many of us have moved and pivoted to digital fast in this new environment so as to keep connected and the ongoing engagement with our alumni and community stakeholders. I think since the last time we spoke, we continue at the University of Calgary to do a number of online or virtual events or webinars, podcasts. I think we have to be aware that it's multitasking at its finest. Thank you. I'm good. Thanks. Mommy can't help you right now. Okay. Sorry about that. As we talk about Zoom fatigue and this new environment that we are in, I think we have to be conscientious that people are having a hard time continuing to maintain that online and digital footprint and engagement. And I think in the beginning, we've certainly noticed in our data that the interest in COVID-specific webinars or virtual engagement was really high. That's starting to wane. And so I think now the task before us all is how do you pivot those engagement strategies to maintain that connection, and what is the value proposition of your institution at a time kind of beyond COVID, and what does that look like? We are starting to reach out to and doing a number of webinars featuring alumni as well as our faculty leads, featuring different subject matter experts, trying to position the university as a leader through this time of crisis in a way that we can facilitate intellectual thought and dialogue. I mean, who better to play that role than a university, really? And so we need to kind of seize that opportunity to be a leader in that area. I will say that we've received a notable uptake and interest in online mentorship programs, career services, career coaching, online resume review, and those types of programs are really in great demand right now. And so we're trying to align our desires to keep people engaged with where's the community at, you know, what do they need from us at a time when this really isn't about us, but it's about them, and how do we facilitate engagement through us that resonates with our community.
That's great, thank you. And say hi to your daughter for us. Brent, over to you, sir.
In every meeting, there's always one. No, you guys, just saying.
The Zoom bingo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, you know, like everyone, we pivoted to the digital and virtual environment. I echo what was said in the sense that our own alumni started to give us feedback that they were done. They didn't need any more Zoom gatherings anymore. And you know, so it became challenging to sort of create programs that were what our community wanted. One of the things that did happen, which was, you know, really a great endeavor, is that we did do a coffee house kind of evening with our alumni, which was actually our alumni performing and sharing their own talents with the community. So that connection, those connections between alumni were actually strongest when they were the show, essentially. And those individuals started to reach out behind the scenes as we asked for these digital submissions, and started to collaborate into forming their own bands, forming you know, singing groups from across the country and across the world. So, you know, where we had success with our alumni was when we were able to find a program where they could talk to each other and build something for our community. So that was kind of the one success. We then sat down with our alumni association, our board, to start planning for the new year. And you know, we had you know, an entire whiteboard filled with all of the virtual things that we could do, and our own board actually stepped forward and said, you know what, we don't want to. We want to hold off until we can actually be present and be part of a community again. So that was surprising. We thought that they would want to continue with the virtual programming, but for them, they've decided to wait to be able to become a community in person.
Very interesting. Thank you to both. Now we're gonna talk a little bit about team support. Everybody had to quickly transition to the virtual world, and when this group talked back on March 25th, there were some comments related to having to manage that, having to sort of deal with people now not being down the hall, around the corner. John Kearsey from the University of Manitoba and Mark Savinkoff from Algonquin College are going to chime in on these ones. So overall, how has the working from home, the virtual settings been for your teams? And what has been your team's biggest learning over the past 2 months? John, we'll start with you. You're on mute, John.
And there's always one of those as
There
well.
you go.
First of all, I just want to echo what everybody else said. What a great opportunity it is to get together like this as a community of advancement professionals. And I'm so glad to see so many people participating in this today. Look, first of all, I'm going to say I'm exhausted. I think we have to be honest about what this has done to us and all this zooming and looking into this camera and trying to work like this. But it's certainly for me and for members of the team that I've spoken to about this we've done really, really well. We actually finished our campaign counting on February 28th and then had to pivot. And we had a campaign close celebration, with 2,000 people expected for April 2nd. And we picked that up and we spun it around literally in 2 weeks and closed out our campaign, and it was phenomenal. And all of that was done remotely, working like this with each other, making big decisions about how we can do this, engaging media, talking to donors, talking to alumni to make sure that we were doing the right thing. We had to completely change our messaging from congratulations to our donors simply, in raising $626 million to this is what happens when communities come together to do something great for their community. And this is what's going to happen in our community as we come out of this difficult time that we're in. And I think it all worked really, really well. And I think, again, our communities, we're looking for universities to have good news stories to share. And however we do that, whether it's like this or in other ways, I think it's been successful. Unfortunately, the other part of us working from home, or during this period, we were also put in a position where the university had to make some very tough decisions around employment and stuff. And so we laid off 31 of our staff during this period of time. And this is how we had to do all of it. And that was gutting. It was gut-wrenching. It was difficult because these are people we all care about. And so we had to make sure that we could do it in the most sensitive of ways and the most meaningful of ways. And because we have such close relationships and we built up such, equity in being in our relationships in person, I think the transition to this has enabled us to maintain those relationships and to stay in good stead with one another. But as time goes on, that runs out. We also recruited an AVP through Zoom, and that person has started working through Zoom. So, just seeing them, we're going through a presidential transition. We're all meeting with the new president through Zoom. So the virtual environment has created so many challenges, but I think I would have to say, as busy and crazy as it's been, we are who we are. We maintain, we try to be our authentic selves, our real selves. And so doing that, whether it's here like this, or whether it's sitting across from each other, social distancing, I think we do it. It seems to be working well for our teams, even during some very celebratory times and some very difficult times.
Thanks, John. I'm sure that layoff piece was very difficult for all involved. Wouldn't want to have to go through that. Mark, at Algonquin, how is your team managed, and what would be one of the biggest learning items over the past 2 months?
Thanks, Mark. And to pick up on a couple of things John just spoke to, one about relationships and the second about community. I think in many ways for our team here at Algonquin College, it's been an 11-week exercise in team building. And it's been something that I think we've all learned through and we'll be able to reflect on. I can't imagine the white papers or the books that can be written on the experiences that the team continues to go through. But I think that there's been an amazing amount of resilience. And I think it's because of a commitment to the cause. The type of work that we all have the privilege of doing is something very special. And a lot of our people recognize that. And they've been able to come together through that, I think, from a couple of different perspectives. One is the really genuine nature about relationships and the ability to manage relationships, not just with our alumni and donors, but relationships with one another. So to the point of some of what we've seen on the webinar here today, a lot of kids running back and forth in the background, and that's just the new normal. There are, dogs barking when courier packages are getting delivered at front doors, and that's just another point of conversation. And there's those really genuine, humble moments that the team is now experiencing with one another that they actually would not have experienced if they had been in the office just with themselves. So there's a bit of a humility there and a sense of vulnerability, but they've been able to come together as a team and really, like you say, address some of the big challenges that we have going on. I think the second component to that is for us a really good, unfortunately, opportunity, shall we say, to focus on process improvement and documentation and really map out some of the process to have that line of sight and that clarity. At Algonquin College, there's a big focus on lean and those principles and that methodology. We have a group called the AC Way team, and working with them as a bit of almost an internal consultant group. There's a lot of focus on visual management, on obstacles, on targets, on percentage against those targets. And what it allows the team to do is really be able to work in a collaborative way with one another and to really be able to ensure that momentum continues for themselves and for our constituents.
Thanks, Mark. Probably not what you expected as a new VP either in terms of timing and stepping into a new role. Well done at Algonquin. So we're going to move into this life during and beyond COVID-19 piece. There's 8 bullets on my sheet and they've all been shared with the panel members. What I'm going to do is kind of go through them one at a time and ask a different panel member to respond to the comment. They don't know which one they're going to get. I didn't give them that heads up, so they've had to study them all. And these, again, most of these were submitted. So these are people's questions from across the country over the last couple of weeks as we've been promoting this. So the first one I'm going to throw to Mike, adjustment of key metrics and fundraising targets. Is that something that's ongoing or started or eventually to start at Simon Fraser?
Yeah, yes and no, I should say. Thanks, Mark. What we've done is actually adjusted our system a little bit so that we can start counting our webinar and, sorry, our Zoom meetings. So we've got a category now of meetings for donors on our system that is specific to Zoom meetings. And that's enabling us to count more effectively, track those more effectively, and I think encourage those meetings to happen more often. Other than that, I think our metrics are at this point staying steady. And to a certain degree, we also feel it's still early days for us. You know, it's only, what is it now, second quarter of fiscal year, and not even fully there. So long and short is we've made a change on our system. Our expectations are still about the same, but we had already built those into our business planning process earlier this fiscal year.
Thanks, Mike. The next question to you, Brent. Looking back on things, what would you have done differently in terms of engaging with alumni and donors in the community?
Well, I think the last time, 8 weeks ago, we talked about the fact that we were postponing a campaign, groundbreaking. And I think that, you know, we kept that information closer to our chest than probably we should have. We were hoping that that the construction in Ontario would allow us to go forward. It was on and then off and then on and off, and we ended up holding our announcement until, you know, just recently. So I think the first thing that we would have done differently is we would have come out of the chute immediately, postponing the groundbreaking publicly rather than just privately with a couple of key donors. You know, one of the challenges with this COVID situation was it felt like, you know, in the early weeks we were providing only negative news, you know, almost daily to our community. Either this is canceled, this is canceled, this is canceled, or postponed. And so, you know, we were trying to manage how much negative information we were sharing and trickle it out. In the end, I think it probably would have been better to just go whole and do it all at the same time.
Interesting observation. Aaron, what has been the biggest surprise for you in the past 2 months?
You know, the flexibility of people and their willingness to make change on the very subjects that we've been talking about making and wanting to change for years. So things, we talked about process improvements. I was on a call about convocation this morning, and a virtual convocation event we did, and how well the team worked together, that had always worked okay together, but never really as well as they did in pulling off what they pulled off. And really the permission of doing something in a new environment, I think, allowed people permission to step back from stuff they were, holding on tight, that we were trying to get in from a different angles to change, ourselves included. So many of the celebrations we're having of accomplishments and recognition of good work, they're not things that we haven't been trying to do for a long time. And they weren't plans or frameworks that we didn't want put together, or new processes and all of that, but just all of a sudden, the urgency of it, and obviously the requirement, but also people's behaviors changed. Whether it's, and I think it will be one of those things that we think about and do case studies on, and to the degree that we have done reassignments of staff within advancement and from other units in the university into advancement. So, kind of trying to go one step further from saying, let's work together as a team on this, and actually saying, I want to take this staff member and put them on that team. And in that, gained the integration that we had been promoting and trying to facilitate and navigate. And I hope that that's one of the things that we keep, are these special reassignments, instead of reassignment to project, actually moving people onto teams. And I'm looking forward to getting more of a smoother blending of culture across teams. I'm looking forward to and need the assets from the university that we needed to bring onto the team, and people just accepted it. So, that's a couple of different ways of saying, we definitely didn't waste this crisis, but we're also learning a lot about what it was like before and why, and how are we going to keep this going in moving forward again.
Thanks, Erin. I think that's a pretty a theme we heard across just about every webinar, that folks have made shifts that they wanted to do before but never really got to do them, and now they've done them, and they hope they keep them because they're working and they're positive. To you, Mark, any surprises emerging from the use of virtual programming?
So I think for us at the college, there's been so much programming that's been done, but in a really decentralized way. And that's been really exciting to see. It's again, different groups having certain connections with either industry experts, community leaders, or proud alumni. And so the ability to have, again, a line of sight to that, to be able to promote that in all of the channels, to really make the most of that online opportunity. And really looking at online opportunities as another form of engagement. When we think of some of the more traditional ways, the objective before should not have just been an in-person event. The event was meant to achieve something. And if we can now achieve that through an online mechanism, ensuring that that's really captured and celebrated in a really appropriate and genuine way.
All right, thanks, Mark. Nuvyn, uncertainty, well, we're starting to hear plans for fall semesters across the country. How are you telling your story to donors as we sort of think ahead to the fall?
I think maintaining that engagement is really critical, and this focus on stewardship. Now is the time to be demonstrating the impact of philanthropy and how it advances the strategic objectives of the university. While the U of C has yet to make a formal statement about what the fall semester will look like, for our team in particular, I think this phased approach of, if you can work from home in September, chances are you will be working from home. Maybe we'll be looking at kind of then slowly phasing people back physically onto campus, but we're encouraging our teams to stay connected and we're unlike, I think, our faculty and students are perhaps in a different situation in terms of that engagement between professor and students, or the labs that we're doing. We in advancement need to think very creatively about ways to keep our staff involved. In fact, I think our teams will be one of the last to return to campus, because quite frankly, many of us don't need to be there. It's important. Yes, it's important for morale, but we have to be very aware of risk, of even logistics. About half of my team are on the top 2 floors of one of the highest towers on campus. So, what does elevator flow look like to get up there? All of these logistical things that we need to consider about as we're planning our workday. So is this an opportunity for us to engage more deeply with the community in the community? These are things that we need to be exploring, and conversations that we need to be having. I've been doing a lot of walking meetings lately. I don't know what that will hold for Canadian winter, but for now we can be enjoying the sunshine and maintaining our physical distance, and close a gift over a cup of coffee and a neighborhood walk.
Very good. That's the elevator piece is certainly an interesting one that many campuses will have to deal with. John, question to you. Given what institutions are doing now, how are things going to move forward as they relate to the COVID pandemic?
On February 27th, I had a conversation with a member of our medical community who said the university would be shut down on March 15th. And I didn't completely discount it, but I thought, really? It's amazing that we're having this conversation today. Still, as I'm listening, I'm like, are we really in this? It still feels a little surreal to me. In terms of how we move forward, I think that concept of what we're all talking about right now, we're going to have to find the ways of engaging with our alumni and donors, or continue to find those ways of engaging with alumni and donors that work for them. As somebody on the call mentioned, people have different ways of connecting. Some will be by telephone, some will be like this. We're going to have to change, rethink, I think, what our metrics are over the next couple of years because of that reality of giving. And while there will always be people who are generous and will want to support the mission of our institutions, there are going to be, I don't think we've seen the worst from the economic perspective of this yet. And so as to be the Debbie Downer on that one, I think that's still a reality that we're going to have to come to terms with. And how we even interact as a community. And we have announced that we're going to an on remote learning environment for the fall. And that presents so many challenges. Revenues will drop because of international students. Revenues drop because of ancillary services and parking and rec fees and stuff like that. And we're going to have to try and make that up in other ways. And so I think we're going to be called upon more than ever before. And so our professionalism, our innovation, all the things that we're capable of and we've demonstrated in the past is going to be heightened, and we're going to have to do it, and we'll have to do it in this kind of an environment going forward, I think. And I also wanted to say, this is just, we missed having all of you here in Winnipeg last week. We set up a beautiful weather week for you, and we missed having everybody here, and we hope you do get a chance to come and spend some time in Winnipeg some other time.
Thanks, John. We certainly missed being there. The CCAE team tried to have a little Winnipeg sort of party every day in some fashion or another, picturing ourselves walking across the Forks Bridge to the museum, or along the riverbank, or whatever it might have been.
Or the University of Manitoba campus.
That's right, absolutely. Derek, to you, key lessons learned from some of the new approaches that you've tried or your team has tried in this pandemic.
Sure. So I think, the biggest things that we've done is, like I mentioned earlier, is moving pretty much all of our engagement with alumni, whether it's content delivery or other engagement opportunities, to a digital online obviously vehicle. For us, the biggest thing was very quickly launching these series of webcasts where we feature McGill experts, for the medical or science fields, but even from other fields sort of tangentially related to the COVID response, and providing these sort of open to all, streamed on our YouTube channel, no registration, just providing information and insight to the community. And I think I would say that the biggest lesson I take away from this is that people want to know that we matter, and they want to know that we're part of the story. There is really only one story in the world right now. There's one thing people care about right now, by and large, which is how do we move forward through this response? And at least in our case, for our alumni, for our donors, to know that McGill is really front and center of this story, I think is really the most important, most viable thing we can do. I think on the last webcast, I may have mentioned the fact that, I think that, maybe less so in Canada, but certainly in other jurisdictions, certainly south of the border, there's sort of been this movement in the last few years where the value of education and the role of universities and higher education institutions in general has sort of maybe been devalued a little bit. And I think if anything, what this crisis is reminding society in general, and certainly our alumni and donors, is the primacy of the role of universities. So, whether any of our institutions are the ones that are going to be the ones to discover the vaccine and deliver it to the world or not, we're all doing tremendous work in our research labs, professors dealing with, stress, anxiety, mental health issues, economic issues, public policy issues. The world is looking to universities right now. You can't put the news on more than 5 or 6 minutes without seeing a university professor being interviewed and asked for their advice and their guidance, and governments are looking to universities. So not that I would ever wish this pandemic on anyone ever again, but if there is any moment for universities, for education to shine, I think it's now. And even those of us who work for institutions where we don't have medical faculties or, very large, science facilities, I think just the role of education, the importance of knowledge, transmitting and transferring knowledge, developing educated societies has never been more critical for our communities. And I think that if we do anything in the next few months as we sort of come back to a new normal, whatever that is, it's going to be to really remind our communities about the important role that our institutions play in society.
Very well put, Derek.
Thank you.
Gillian, to you, what do you predict will be the most unexpected, whether that's positive or negative outcome in advancement in the next year? Big question.
So I'm going to start with the negative one, and then I'll go to the positive one, just to end on a positive note. But when I think about there are, as Derek has said, there are actually many silver linings to what we're going through. Well, I think all of the panelists have spoken to that, and I think the most kind of negative outcome that I can think of is the pain that we're all experiencing basically by not being able to connect with each other, the pain of the loss of milestones in our lives. So I think of, all the events that sometimes they drive us crazy when we're putting them on, but we're missing them now because we're not with those donors and those alumni and those staff colleagues that we like and faculty members that we cherish connecting with. I think as we think about the return to school in the new year, how different September will be. And I think all of us that work on a campus, whether it's an independent school or a college or a university, we love September, right? Because that's when all those young people are back and they're so eager to get on with the adventures that they're going to experience that year. And it's going to be very different. At U of T, we're still planning to have some in-class experience, so there will be students, but it will be such a changed environment. So I think for me, that loss of connection and the pain that and sense of grief, and to some extent that comes with that, will be the most negative thing. But then if I can try to turn that to a more positive note, I think that a positive outcome is that we've learned so much about how we can still connect and maintain community through these platforms, through email correspondence with people that is thoughtfully done, through phone calls, which can sometimes be more intimate, a more personal connection than a Zoom call, strangely. And so I think, the discovery of the fact that we can continue to build community, even without being physically present with each other is probably a positive outcome of this. And I think related to that is I'm finding that among our donors and our alumni and our staff that we're all, you know, recommitting to the notion of community, right? And our responsibility to each other and our opportunity to help each other at times of need. And so I think that's a positive outcome of this. And then the last one that I would just end on is the point that Derek made about how the role of education in our society, the importance of trusted research, of, you know, science, evidence-based information, and you know, the role of trained people, educated people in our workforce, and how that's going to help us, you know, survive and then recover from this experience. The fact that that is being, you know, sort of recognized anew, if you will, and revalidated in a sense. I don't know if revalidated is a word, but I think that's a very important positive outcome of that. So I think Derek put it better than I did, but I'll just end there. Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. So I got one last question. We're going to go quickly to each person to give a response. It's probably not the best subject, but it's certainly one that we got asked quite a bit. The impact on advancement budgets and what you're anticipating. Most budgets would have already been approved or gone through, and now it's sort of readjusting. So how are budgets being affected? We'll start with you, Mark, at Algonquin.
Sure, thanks, Mark. So we went through a budget reduction exercise that tried to see us all achieve 13%, and had to articulate some of the challenges associated with that. Thankfully, we did not have to go quite as deep as 13, but that was some of the working targets that we started with, and that was college-wide, not just specific to our group.
And hi to your partner there. John, at the University of Manitoba, you spoke a little bit about it earlier, but within your own team?
It was very difficult, of course, to make the budget adjustments that were required of us and across the university, and the impact it's had. And they are temporary layoffs, by the way, on our team members. From one of the things I'm very pleased with, we just came out of campaign, and our donor, our relations staff have been in touch with all of many of our donors who are in pledge payments, and all of that is continuing. People have given us their assurance. We've had people calling to see how we're doing and see if there's anything they can do to help us out. But it is going to be, I think, as we get into the school year and see where there are revenue drops for other parts of the university, we may be called on to respond differently. Obviously, endowment levels are going to be impacted by this, and that makes up a part of our budget. So I think, you know, the word unpredictable just keeps coming to mind for me, and it's hard to, I don't like guessing at these kind of things, but I think there are challenges going to be ahead, but we work again with a community of people who are innovative and creative and make the best out of difficult situations. And that's what being a part of a group like this is why it's so important as well, because we can learn from each other.
Thanks, John. Mike, I think I asked you the first question, and here I am coming back to you at the very end, but how are things shaping up at Simon Fraser?
I think we're in relatively good shape at the moment. We're not cutting budget in advancement right now. We are paying a lot of attention to costs, and so, you know, I'm grateful for that at the moment. And that's fair to say across campus that's the case. There have been areas where we've had natural cost savings because of construction slowdowns, and that has been very helpful. In BC, I think we've also done well overall as a province, and that's helped us as a university too. What I'm really interested in is our endowment and how our endowment will survive this. Well, not survive, will manage through this. The timing of this was interesting for us because our endowment returns came in around April, beginning of our fiscal year. So we have 12 months basically to manage this. And because of our stabilization account, and we manage our endowment returns based on book value, we're actually in okay shape. We're indexing right now against inflation, and our endowment returns are very healthy up until end of March. They're down now, obviously, of course, but it has not affected our income for this year, our endowment income at all. We're gonna have to wait till next year to see what our impact is. But again, gives us 12 months to really figure that out, and hopefully wait till the market bounces back a little bit.
I'm sure that's a conversation ongoing across the country with VP Finance folks. Nuvyn at the University of Calgary, in terms of advancement department and budgets.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens in Alberta over the next, 3, 6, 9, 12, 18, 24 months from now. We are continuing to look at our strategic priorities so that decisions that we make are not in reaction to a particular budget, but what do we need to be doing? Where do we need to be doubling down on our areas of strength? What are we doing that we don't need to be doing anymore? How has the world fundamentally changed as a result of COVID, so that we are ensuring that we aren't doing the same thing we've always been doing, only with less money. And as a result, we're looking at realigning some portfolios, at doubling down on, for example, our some of our digital platforms, looking at our stewardship shop, looking at the way that we are promoting advancement and philanthropy and community engagement across our institution and beyond. So this is an opportunity, and I won't say that adage of like, don't waste a crisis, but this is an opportunity to examine structure and to really do some thoughtful strategic planning and goal setting with the team, with the teams on campus.
Thanks, Nuvyn. Brent, different kind of plots in the independent school space. What's the trickle down into the advancement space looking like?
Yeah, obviously our shops are much smaller, and in many cases are integrated. So, we take care of all of the advertising, marketing, communications, and advancement. Primarily what we've looked at is we're actually trying to save about 30% on our budget, but we don't have to give that back. So it's not an institutional cut that we have to get down to, but we want to actually create a little bit of a fund internally to be able to activate it if we need to on the advertising and marketing front. Obviously, the recruitment of new families every year for independent schools is our lifeblood. And, that we're seeing with the economy and just the unstable nature of the world right now. Nobody knows what next year, 21, 22, will look like. So we're trying to save as much as we can. Thankfully, events aren't happening, and so we are, and we, as a school, small community, there's an awful lot of events. So we've got a lot of savings there, and they're getting shifted over into marketing and advertising. The advancement budget is pretty stable, but we're certainly not anticipating that we're going to be able to increase it, which was our plan as we were going to be in the last years of our campaign. So.
All right, thanks, Brent. Erin, to you.
At St. Mary's, I think it's similar to the tone that I've heard. We're looking out, 2 years. We're looking out cash flow, and we're looking out, at best case and kind of medium case. And the medium case are looking at numbers like 25 or 30% down for fall enrollment. So in the same way as the timing of when this happened, around endowments and year end and new budget years was really, and the fact that it was in the middle of winter, I'm stuck in the house, was really good in the grand scheme of things. If it had happened right before the fall and we lost our whole fall semester without a time to run up to it, and I don't think we can feel that there's any guarantees on that. We all have said there's more change to come. But we've had this window of time to operate, because whether it is just as an exercise or whether it is actually, quick to take action, I think there will be calls at different times across the country for all advancement shops to look at their budget and imagine them differently, and just to even be prepared to be able to have the time to give some thought to it. We're all funded differently, operating budget versus endowment, piece of gifts, reserves. Most of us have a couple of different pieces of that. And, I had the first conversation with my broad team today about asking for, not the first conversation, but a very specific conversation about budget oversight, that we needed to really be thinking about every dollar spend. We needed to balance the expectation of quality and delivering on, everything under the sun, but also thinking about what are the costs associated and being able to make a case on impact. So I expect in the coming future that many universities will be asked in a different way from their leadership, and St. Mary's won't be immune to that, to do some scenario planning of what strategic reallocations will mean, which will come from some level of targeted cuts in areas, or small across the boards, and then bigger cuts to other areas. And I feel better prepared for it now than 2 months ago to even be thinking about it strategically. Because of what we've learned, what the team's capable of, and what makes an impact. And I'll just throw in, it's outside the question, but half of our donors in the past two months have been new donors. And so I'm really optimistic about our ability to build revenue, and trying to put as much or more effort into that, obviously, than the expense question, but it's top of mind.
Congrats on the new donors. Derek at McGill.
Sure, I'll go quickly. I know we're past time here. So we've obviously had some significant budget cuts, compressions, I would say, to deal with. In our advancement shop, no staff cuts, which have been great. We do have a university-wide hiring freeze, which we're already starting to feel the effects of as people do leave. We've made most of our compressions through programmatic cuts. So obviously our event budgets, our travel budgets for the year were essentially reduced to pretty much zero. We've also had to take some compressions across our printing, our postage, and advertising budgets. So I think, as Aaron and others on the panel said, we're just being very careful with how we spend money. So really double checking before we hire even a freelance writer or a freelance designer. There's sort of another layer of checking to make sure we really need to move forward with this expense at this time. The McGill News print magazine, for example, just celebrated its 100th anniversary last year. And this year we'll be moving to an all digital edition for the first time ever, temporarily, just simply as a way to save on printing and postage. We'll hopefully come back to a print version in 2021, but that's just another example of a pretty major decision we've had to make, but every little piece sort of adds up. The one thing I will add, someone mentioned earlier about the digital piece, surprisingly, or I guess gladly, we actually did increase our digital advertising budget by about 20% for the year ahead, recognizing that much more of our activity is going to have to happen in the digital space, through organic digital efforts, but also by spending a bit more money digitally with Google, Facebook, etc., to try to grab more attention from people. So overall, not a great picture, but certainly we could have been in a worse situation. So.
Thanks, Derek. And certainly last but not least, CCAE Board Chair Gillian Morrison, just to close out the session in terms of budgeting at U of T.
Yeah, so I think, like all institutions, University of Toronto will be experiencing budget pressures as a result of this. We have not been specifically given a target or a number or a directive to make cuts, but obviously, as everyone else has described, we're looking at how we're spending very closely, and we're also, thinking. I think Nuvyn mentioned this about the balance between how we reallocate. If we're going to be doing less travel, particularly international, for a long period of time, if we won't be doing events for a long period of time, what savings can be achieved there. But at the same time, if we are going to be doing more digital, even when we come back to doing events, how do we make sure that we make the proper investments in digital? Because it's not just about everybody having a Zoom account. It's a bit more complex than that. And so we're thinking through right now, what would those investments be if we really need to become more and more expert at delivering materials digitally in a way that continues to be engaging. So that's what I'll say about that. And I know you want to finish off, Mark, but I just want to thank you again for the great work you've done with this webinar series. You and the team, it's been spectacular and a tremendous service to the community, the advancement community across the country, and just wonderful leadership on your part. Thank you so much, Mark.
Well, thanks, Gillian. It's been a real pleasure for the last 9 weeks to be connecting with leaders from across the country, different topics, different conversations. Thanks to everybody today. We did lose a few panel members already. They had other commitments to get to. So thanks to all of you and others that might be online. I also want to thank the participants, the folks that came every week. Again, servicing over 1,300 advancement professionals. Those are numbers CCA has really never seen before, especially in a 9-week period. And so we're really thrilled with that, that we're able to provide the service and have the conversations that we had across the country. I'll sign off. Stay safe, everyone. If you can, enjoy the summer. And CCA will be back. We will connect again in the very near future. Take care.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Good to see you guys.